Hey, wouldn't it be great if life came with a remote control? You know, you could hit pause when you needed to, or hit rewind. Like that time you knocked down that wasp's nest.
Uh-oh.
Or that time you forgot to roll up your windows in the car wash.
Fantastic.
Yeah, a remote control would have come in handy then. Well, life doesn't always give you time to change the outcome, but prediabetes does. With early diagnosis and a few healthy changes like managing your weight, getting active, stopping smoking, and eating healthier, you can stop prediabetes before it leads to type 2 diabetes. It's easy to learn your risk. Take the 1-minute test today at doihaveprediabetes.org. Life doesn't come with a remote control. Yikes! So you're on your own with the wasps. You have the power to take control of prediabetes. Visit doihaveprediabetes.org today. That's doihaveprediabetes.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council and its Prediabetes Awareness Partners.
This podcast of the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs, is sponsored by AAA Heating and Air.
The premier HVAC company in the Midlands is growing. Are you a top HVAC technician?
AAA Heating and Air is looking for dedicated applicants to fill their fast-growing service department with top-notch HVAC technicians.
If you're the best, then they want you. If you're ready to stop working and start a career, you can earn up to $100,000 plus a year at AAA Heating and Air.
Quality candidates will have at least 2 years experience and a good driving record. Benefits include top industry salaries, commission on service and unit sales, set call limits, company-provided take-home vehicle and gas card, company-provided cell phone and tablet, health, dental, and vision benefits, 401k retirement plan with company match, and scaled PTO based on length of service.
Contact Roy and Dana Finley at 803-677-1500 or check out their job postings on Facebook or ZipRecruiter.
AAA Air when you need us. AAA Heating and Air.
It's the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs, founded by firemen. With Chris Clark.
The 2007 South Carolina class was, at that time, 6th in the country and 4th in the SEC, which is amazing.
Wes Mitchell.
You know, I think if you're South Carolina, you're aiming to at least be at 50%. Then in theory, you're adding talent, you're getting better, you're putting yourself in a position to compete.
And Tyler Head.
It's been a great week for South Carolina. On the recruiting front, still certainly plenty to talk about.
On the home of the Gamecocks, 107.5 The Game.
And welcome in to the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs here on 107.5 The Game. Tyler Head and Wes Mitchell along with you in the Herndon Chevrolet studio. Thank you once again to Jeremy Smith from the Garnet Trust for hanging out with us for today's edition of the Garnet Trust Hour. Got a lot of good insight into what's going on with NIL, which is always kind of this ever-evolving conversation as we see more and more things about like the collectives and some of these coaches now going up and lobbying Congress, trying to kind of wrangle this thing in a little bit. We know it's kind of been referred to as the Wild West over these past couple of years, and see if anything can change and would be able to change based on what Congress is able to do, I guess.
Yeah, which is a scary sentence, the last part of that there, but yeah, appreciate Jeremy coming in and providing his insights. Fantastic job by him, as always. Always great to hear from him. But, Tyler, I am glad to read earlier this week that the collectives will be represented there. As Jeremy said, various coaches will be represented. South Carolina will have representatives up there as well. And, I think anytime you get something like this, and this, I know it's easy to, hate on Congress and stuff. I don't even mean that here. Anybody who would be involved in something like this and would have to if you just got dropped in,
sure,
and we're like, hey, help us figure this out, you'd be looking around like, what the
yeah.
How do you even start to think about sort of kind of creating a roadmap here,
sure,
that's gonna work for everybody? And so I think it's difficult for even the people who are in it on the day-to-day. So how can Congress, which, again, there's going to be people involved there that have their own motives that go well beyond, college athletics involved as well. So I think it's a difficult situation. It's going to be very difficult to actually wrangle it in, as you said. But I do think there has to be some approach that could maybe make it better than it is now. I think for me, the most difficult part of it is that you remember 2 years ago when all this started.
Yep.
And it was, I think the first NIL deal I saw dropped at like midnight the day, I think it was June 1.
Right.
And who was that? Was that Bo? Quarterback?
It might have been. Let me double check.
I think he was the first guy. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. But it was kind of like everybody just were like, well, the day has come. There's nothing in place to put any guardrails in. And so it wasn't one of these things where, it was all completely well thought out and everybody was working off of the same rules and everybody had come to an agreement and then we're going to allow NIL. It was kind of like, oh, crap, here it is.
Right.
And so once you've kind of let it get as expansive as it is, then how do you then reel it back in? Sometimes when, the toothpaste is out, it's hard to put it back in the tube. So I think that's going to be the difficult part about this. If I'm already in it, if I'm an athlete, what incentive do I have to, let them put these guardrails in? Now, there does still at some point you have to, I guess, acknowledge that the NCAA does have some power to say you cannot play under our banner.
Yes.
So that's still a factor, I think. But how much pushback do you get if the guardrails tug too much?
And I did look it up. Bo Nix, who at the time was at Auburn, was one of the original.
Sweet Tea.
Yeah, it was Milo's Sweet Tea, which I myself am a very big fan of. That was one of the first legitimate NIL deals that did drop very quickly as soon as, I guess it was June 1 of 2021. We are now past the 2-year mark, believe it or not, once all that officially became legal. And we've obviously seen what's happened since. I don't see the number figure of what that deal was. I don't imagine it was in the neighborhood of millions of dollars quite yet.
No, it was probably let's be one of the first. And
sure,
I mean there was actually some great value, I would imagine, in some of those NIL deals because they probably weren't huge financially.
Sure,
and they were getting shared everywhere, not just as an ad, but as, hey, this is news. Like, this has never happened before. So, and I thought, it was fitting that it was, Sweet Tea in the Southeast. I mean, it kind of worked. But
right.
I remember at the time, all NIL deals for at least 48 hours were being treated like news items because it was so new.
Just kind of scouring the internet here, it looked like his deal was around $8,000-9,000 per semester. Again, very small in comparison to some of the deals that we've seen now. But again,
not bad.
It not bad at all. And again, it was the very beginning. We didn't know how far this was going to go. And I go back to a couple years ago when when the wheels were kind of starting to turn on this, thinking that it might come to fruition. I thought, I didn't think there was any way that college athletes were going to be making $5-10 million on these NIL deals, and I was certainly proven wrong by that because, again, at the end of the day, in a capitalistic economy, the market does set the price.
Well, I do think something lost in all of this, Tyler, for me, is that you look now and a lot of guys will maybe, especially guys that maybe played 20, 30, 40 years ago, and what could they have made then? Well, the biggest difference between then and now, even for the guys 20 years ago, is not just the internet.
Yeah.
It is, and the internet certainly is like the platform for all of it, but it's social media.
Yes.
Now you have put in place a precedent of influencers making money.
Sure.
So college football athletes in some ways are kind of like influencers, I think. And a lot of them, they're the ones that are making just the big money. It's obviously their social media following.
Right.
So, 20 years ago, you didn't have people that had Instagram and had, 900,000 followers on there. So
sure.
I think that's been a big part of this equation. It probably would have been much different if it would have happened then. Now, there was still going to be opportunities. There were still going to be situations where guys could make some money. At the time, the amount of money that's in college athletics now was not sort of floating around either.
Yeah.
So I think it's just kind of this you have two things sort of crossroading with each other in that influencers now make if they have a big enough following, they
Sure.
can make millions of dollars. So it's kind of similar, I think.
And that was kind of one of those things that there were some college athletes before NIL became legal that were kind of skirting the system a little bit by having things like a YouTube channel. There was that kicker at South Florida a couple years ago that, was basically quit college football so we could have this YouTube channel where he was making money because the NCAA said, hey, you're not allowed to do this. This is not legal under our rules. But now, again, it does afford those opportunities for guys student athletes to have those kind of avenues. And we talked about, some of the student athletes that come in here, they've talked about things they're doing on TikTok and being able to, market that and stuff like that. So, 20, 30 years ago, if you weren't in a TV commercial or on a billboard or in a radio spot, there weren't a whole lot of avenues to advertise on that would make you attractive to some of these other brands. But now it's pretty much infinite things you can do with these.
Yeah, and I think while you can probably point to quite a few different things for the driving force of NIL, becoming legal for guys to make or guys and girls to receive payments from. If you look back, yes, the EA Sports game and sort of everything that came from that is probably one of the big driving forces. I think if you really sort of dialed in on it, the situation with that South Florida kicker and just sort of really not him specifically, but the implications of that. The fact that he was making money on a different platform because he had a personality and he was good at it.
Yes.
And them thinking they had the reach to say, you can't do that.
Right.
And how that was still kind of, I guess, a new thing at the time. But now, I mean, how many different people are making money off of that very, very thing now? So I think that maybe is just as much of a driving force in all this, even though it's not talked about as much as, maybe the video game and all the, the Ed O'Bannon suit and all that stuff.
Right. And the thing when NIL came about 2 years ago is people thinking it was just going to drastically change what we see on the field or court or whatever it may be. And through 2 years, game doesn't look any different to me.
No, the game looks great. I mean, your Georgia Bulldogs smashed, their opponent in the actual final game, but the college football playoff itself, the two semifinal games were really, really good and really, really entertaining.
Right.
And we saw, I dare say the ratings probably didn't drop at all this year. I haven't looked at them, but I think the game itself, it's kind of weird. The game itself on the field is still in a fantastic spot, even though, there's a lot of hardcore fans out there who will sit there and say, I hate this NIL stuff, hate this transfer portal, but they're still watching the games.
Well, is that what you're thinking about when you're watching your team play at 3:30 on a Saturday? Is that quarterback's making $2 million. That doesn't sit well with me. No, he threw 4 touchdowns and we won the game by 13 points. That's what you're worried about that day.
Until he's making that money and throws 4 interceptions.
Yeah, what are we paying
then it may be
for?
Yeah, then it does. But you see that in professional sports,
sure,
too. So that's not that different than other sports, I think.
No, absolutely. All right. Again, thanks to Jamie Smith for coming and hanging out with us for the Garnet Trust Hour. And if you missed any of that conversation, I'll have it up in just a little while on the 107.5 The Game podcasting page. On the other side, we finally found out the time and days of South Carolina's Super Regional as they head down to Gainesville this weekend. We'll talk about that next and preview that on the other side. You're listening to the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs on 107.5 The Game.
We tell you about it every single day, and that's because Firehouse Subs has a sub of the day for every single day, even on Saturday and Sunday. Today is Tuesday, of course, and y'all know what that means. That is turkey, bacon, ranch. That is Tyler's favorite sub. That is Juice Wells' favorite sub. It is one of my favorite subs. I have about 3 or 4 on rotation. That means you can get the sub of the day, a medium for $7.99, a small for $5.99. But we always go with the medium, $7.99, rapid rescue, order online. Pull up the app. That's the easiest way to do it. You can click around on there, pick your toppings, change it around if you want, and they will put your sub and your chips in a bag on the shelf. It'll be sitting there waiting for you. Completely efficient, easy way to do it. Get your lunch at Firehouse Subs. Again, firehousesubs.com, rapid rescue, order online. And today for $7.99, a medium turkey bacon ranch. You can't beat it.
Previewing the Gainesville Super Regional up next on the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs, 107.5 The Game.
It's Gamecock Central Takeover Hour. Presented by Firehouse Subs. Founded by firemen with Chris Clark, Wes Mitchell, and Tyler Head on your home of the Gamecocks. 107.5 The Game.
2-2 offering. Cut on and miss. Florida is headed back to the Super Regionals. Led by stars like Wyatt Langford, the Gators are back in the Supers for the first time since 2018.
And welcome back into the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs here on 107.5 The Game. Tyler and Wes along with you. That was the call yesterday on ESPN as Florida took care of Texas Tech 6-0 down there in Gainesville to punch their ticket to the Super Regional, where they will take on the Gamecocks coming up this weekend. And as Wes mentioned in the last hour, the Garnet Trust Hour, we have learned what the start times of the first two games are, at least. Obviously, Friday night at 6 o'clock on ESPN2, and then Saturday game 2 will be at 3 o'clock, also seen on ESPN2. And, of course, those two games will be heard right here on 107.5 The Game. And if there's a third game, if necessary, that will take place on Sunday, a time to be announced later. But as far as things go, with Florida playing on Monday and South Carolina playing on Sunday, and yes, you have the travel day factored in there, a little bit surprised that we didn't get this bumped from a Sunday through Monday series.
Yeah, and I don't know what all went into the decisions. And, obviously you had other series that went into Monday as well, so I don't know what all went into it. But I don't think by then that it'll be a huge effect on Florida. I think obviously they had to do a little bit more than South Carolina. They were stretched a little bit more and pushed to the brink, unlike South Carolina. But hey, that's part of it. There's some value there if you're South Carolina for just taking care of business, and you get an extra day's rest, and you get to get ready, and you already kind of knew, all right, it's going to be one of these two opponents, so you could maybe get a little head start on both of them. But yeah, here it is, SEC opponents. Carolina. You sit there, you say, all right, you're 2 wins away from Omaha, and it's a team that you swept, and so I don't know mentally. It's going to be interesting to see mentally. You have one team that's out for whatever it's worth, revenge, and
Sure.
They got to get the better of South Carolina because South Carolina swept them, versus the mental edge of knowing, hey, you defeated this team soundly.
Yep.
You didn't just win the series. It was not one of those series that came down to 2 pitches. This was a situation where you brought them to your house and you won all 3 games. So I think there's an edge that comes to that. So I don't know ultimately what that matters on the field, if it matters or not, but it certainly will be talked about leading up to this. And, I think, you and I talked about this yesterday. There's some value now to knowing it is a 3-game series, best of 3. It could be 2, but point being, you kind of know where the finish line is.
Sure.
If you're playing in a regional, you don't actually know where the finish line is. And so it's kind of a awkward way as far as managing your pitching staff. In this case, you manage it almost the way you would with a little bit shorter leash in game, I think, but almost the way you would during a regular SEC series. And I do think you brought up a great point yesterday, Tyler. What is Will Sanders' role this weekend?
Right.
And I tend to think it's still out of the bullpen because I think you can use him to win a game 1 or game 2.
Mm-hmm.
If for some reason it got to a game 3 and you hadn't used him yet, then I think certainly he's on the table, even if it's more of like an opener type thing,
Sure.
where it's I look at opener like, hey, get us through the order once.
Yeah.
And so I think that's possible. Could he pitch an inning in a game 1 and be an opener in a game 3? I would think that would be on the table as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think you've got a pretty solid 1-2 with Hicks and Mahoney, for your Friday and Saturday starts. And then, if you get to a game 3, you hopefully don't have to. You just take care of them and on a Friday and Saturday and don't have to worry about that third game. Then you can have the conversation of, okay, how much will we use Sanders? What do we want to go with Beck, or what's the decision here? I really liked what we saw out of Sanders coming out of the bullpen, in the regional. And obviously those are low-pressure situations because you were up by a lot in both those games. And, we knew he was on a short leash that, okay, if things got sideways, they could pull him. It wouldn't be that big of a deal. We knew that was big from a confidence standpoint, but again, he does match up very well with Florida, going back to what he did against them last season, and then earlier on this season in that Friday start, easily his best start of the entire year. So it's a conversation to be had, and again, hopefully you don't have to play a game 3 where you have to come to that decision, but it's an option that would be on the table.
How about the emergence of Hicks in this conversation as well? I mean, this is a guy who was, going to be a starter last year. He was supposed to be a guy that could help anchor your rotation, and is a little bit overlooked because of some of the other guys that South Carolina has had.
Yep.
Has had a pretty good year, for the most part, kind of in that weapon role that Kingston likes to call it. But I feel like he's taken it to another level as a starter. And some guys are just better in that starter role. It's easy to overlook, let's say, the start against Georgia. It's easy to be like, well, that's not a great baseball team. But coming into it, that was a team that hit the baseball.
Yeah.
And, had a really nice lineup. And Hicks, I thought, obviously looked phenomenal against them. Central Connecticut State, I look at it more like he just did what he was supposed to do. But the emergence of, him in that role and what he's done, I think really makes you feel pretty good about South Carolina being able to make a run at this thing. I tend to think, Tyler, this is going 3 games. I don't know who's going to win it, but I think the teams are going to be close enough that baseball kind of has a way when it's 2 tight teams of making it, of kind of evening out. And I would be a little bit surprised if either team is able to just take 2. I think it goes a full 3 games.
Well, from South Carolina's perspective, especially when it's a team that you're in the conference with, beating them 5-0 over the course of the season, that's a tall task. And obviously we'd love to see them do that on Friday and Saturday, but I agree with you. I think this is a series that likely goes to that 3rd game on Sunday and ends up being kind of the rubber match there. You heard the call there on ESPN at the end of the game against Texas Tech yesterday. Florida going back to their first super regional since 2018. They won the title in 2017, go back to Omaha the year after, and have not been back to a super regional since. So when you kind of look at these 2 programs side by side, both of them in a very similar position of trying to get back into Omaha for the first time in a handful of years. Obviously, Florida's been more recently, but when you look at the success both programs have had over the past couple of decades, the expectations for both fan bases is, hey, we should be in Omaha more often than not, and for the past handful of years, neither team has gotten there.
Were you floored? Like, I didn't realize it had been that long since they had been in a super.
Yeah, it was surprising kind of looking up their numbers yesterday, preparing to talk about it today. Like, wow, since winning that championship and getting bounced the next year, yeah, they haven't been back to a super at all.
And I feel like, as far as baseball goes, these 2 programs will always be kind of linked.
Sure.
From the fact that they played each other, South Carolina beating Florida in Omaha.
Yep.
To the fact that, Sully was largely rumored to be a target for South Carolina when they ended up hiring Kingston.
If he doesn't win that national championship, it's a very likely chance he does come here.
It very easily could have happened. And they were, I believe, on the ropes from Wake Forest.
Yeah.
And end up coming back, making that run. And you can't leave a place
Sure.
on the heels of winning a national title. So that was not going to happen at that point. But in an alternate reality, maybe Sully does take the South Carolina job. And shoot, then maybe Kingston takes the Florida job.
Yeah.
Because he obviously would have had a great understanding of what, the college baseball landscape was in that state. So these programs are forever linked, in my opinion. It's a little bit fitting that they're going to be playing each other for the right to go to Omaha.
Yep.
I think at this point this has been a successful season for South Carolina, but now that you are here, you want to win the thing, and you want to play well, and you want to represent yourself well. I think, like we talked about yesterday, everything came up aces for South Carolina in this regional. It sets up perfectly for them, and they got a good shot to do it. I don't know if anybody can sit there and pick a winner in this thing. I think it's truly a coin flip. I don't think you bet against either one of these teams at this point.
Yeah, and for South Carolina, it's a way to redeem how last season ended, where you drop 2 or 3 down in Gainesville, then you face Florida in the first game and Hoover and get bounced by them as well, ultimately ending your season. So a lot on the line here for both programs.
I think this also is a little bit of an example of the fact that this is still, this SEC conference and what you have to go through now your expectations at South Carolina are always going to be extremely high. And I'm not saying it's okay to have a season like South Carolina did last year.
Sure.
I'm not saying it's okay to finish under 500 at South Carolina. Like I'm not saying we should normalize that with this program. But I just think, dude, it is harder than ever in this league to be consistently at the top of it. And the fact that Florida, hasn't been to a super since 2018, I think, that's as good of a program as any. South Carolina is as good of a program as any. I saw the stat. I saw the graphic. Carolina is tied for third all-time in super regional, berths. So, dude, that tells you what this program has been, certainly since they went to this format.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and again, when you look at the SEC having half of the hosting bids in the regional, that as much as a lot of people nationally maybe didn't like to see that happen. I talked about this yesterday. Even Roddy Jones, who was doing the commentary on ESPN Plus for the Columbia Regional, was even saying in that first game against Central Connecticut State that he wasn't comfortable with that many SEC teams, getting the hosting bids. But hey, if you're a powerful conference, you should get as many hosting bids as possible. If in 2 years, all 16 SEC teams are good enough to have hosting bids, they should all have them. It shouldn't be forcing parity or anything like that. But again, it goes back to how tough this league is, and trying to come out of it and get your way into super regionals and Omaha is harder than ever.
No doubt. And I think you have better resources than anybody, as far as SEC play goes. You have better resources, so the fans obviously are going to put higher expectations. But you look top to bottom of this conference, and there are, I would say not everybody, but pretty much everybody is putting resources. There's a lot of, you look around, there's a lot of new stadiums. When South Carolina opened their stadium in 2009, it was, hey, this thing is the best out there. Well, now pretty much all the top SEC schools have either renovated or built new stadiums as well. So I think it's harder than ever, but the fact that South Carolina sits here, if you would have told, even with the ups and the downs, I think if you'd have told everybody, hey, take it or leave it, here's your record right now, 40-plus wins, and you're going to be going to Florida, you're going to be in a super, and you got a chance to win 2 games and go to Omaha and just let it land how it lands at this point, would you take that? I think all Gamecock fans would say, sign me up for that right now. So here we are. That's where it's at. Let's see what happens. And I think this team goes into that weekend with a ton of confidence.
Yep.
And you cannot overanalyze what that might mean. I also think, though, the pitching is going to take a big step up. So for Carolina, you're not going to score 19 runs in a game this weekend. You're not going to have the same outcomes that you had this past weekend.
Sure.
I think the biggest key for them, Tyler, is to be able to continue to put together some of these at-bats like we saw, even if things aren't going well,
right?
Even if you're getting frustrated, even if you're not getting put on base like they were this week with walks and hit by pitches and errors. It's going to be a different quality of game. It's going to be a different style of game, I think. But for them, it's going to be about, can you maintain that plate discipline and sort of grind out at bats, because they didn't really have to do that this past weekend.
Right. Again, first game coming up on Friday night at 6 o'clock, which you can listen to right here on 107.5. The game pregame coverage will be starting at 5:45. Up next, we'll dive into a little bit of recruiting and visitors coming to town this weekend. You're listening to the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs on 107.5 The Game.
Want to tell everybody now about our friends at Integrated Media. By the way, very soon, Tyler, you see these cameras in here, man. So very soon, we've been telling people about this for quite a while. They're going to be able to see us, and that is because of these high-res, high-quality cameras that our friends at Integrated Media have installed here in the studio. And guess what? I know you probably don't need high-res cameras in your office at your house, but maybe you want to upgrade that man cave. Maybe you want to put a home theater system in. Maybe you want, this is one of my favorite things, when people have the external speaker outside of their house to where you're grilling out, having some people over, and you can still hear the music outside. Anything that has to do with your home audio or visual setup, our friends at Integrated Media in Chapin can help you out with that. Give them a call, 803-948-8327, or go to integratedmediainc.com. Again, that's 803-948-8327.
Recruiting talk next on the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs on 107.5 The Game.
In honor of all those we've lost to cancer and those still fighting and thriving, like basketball analyst and cancer champion Dick Vitale.
I want to beat cancer. I'm going to beat it. That's no doubt in my mind. I'm going to win this battle.
Defeating cancer will take all of us. Join our team to help fund game-changing research that saves lives. At the V Foundation, V is for victory over cancer. V is for victory over the odds. V is for victory over health disparities, victory over setbacks, victory over the unknown. V is for victory over giving up.
Don't give up. Don't ever give up.
Join the V Foundation team and help save lives.
Cancer can take away all my physical abilities. It cannot touch my mind, it cannot touch my heart, and it cannot touch my soul.
Join our team in the fight against cancer at V.org.
You are getting sleepy. Your CPAP mask is clamped tightly to your face. You will not toss and turn through the whooshing. You will not throw the mask.
It's not working, Harold.
People who struggle with CPAP have partners who struggle too. Luckily, now there's Inspire. No mask, no hose, just sleep.
When I snap my fingers, you will remember to visit InspireSleep.com.
Inspire is not for everyone. Talk to your doctor to see if it's right for you and review important safety information at InspireSleep.com.
It's the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour. Presented by Firehouse Subs. Founded by firemen with Chris Clark, Wes Mitchell, and Tyler Head on your home of the Gamecocks. 107.5 The Game.
And welcome back into the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Here on 107.5 The Game, Tyler and Wes along with you on this Tuesday morning. And while the South Carolina baseball team will be heading down to Gainesville this weekend, there'll be plenty of things happening around campus here in Columbia as Gamecocks get set to welcome in another group of potential prospects this weekend, as they had quite a few in town over this past weekend that we talked a little bit about yesterday, and more coming up as this very important month of June rolls along.
Yeah, recruiting always big this time of year, and South Carolina, again, going to host 3 major official visit weekends. And, you know, a situation where all these guys have different timelines and all these guys have different plans for when they want to announce. But for the most part, I'm seeing more and more prospects who take the approach of take my official visits during the summer and then make a decision during the summer so that I can focus on my senior year. So when you're talking about official visits right now, these are all 2024 prospects. These are all players who have one more year of high school left, and then a lot of them will enroll early at the school of their choice. Not all of them, but more and more guys are doing that, especially the top guys are going ahead and getting a head start, enrolling in January, going through spring practice. But sort of the way it has split up, June 2nd, that was this past weekend. Obviously, South Carolina had 6 official visitors on campus. We are still working through the final list. I'll throw some names out there here in a second, but going to be, I would say, a similar number, if not a little bit higher this weekend. And then Friday, June 23rd, will be the final big weekend for South Carolina. That will be when they'll host several of their top remaining uncommitted targets, as well as pretty much the entire committed class. So that's by design. They, of course, want some of these guys who are not committed to want to join the class, and that will be the case, just letting them spend an entire weekend around guys who, are already committed to the program. And in some cases, I mean, I thought this was a fantastic sign for South Carolina. You had Dante Reno on campus this weekend on his unofficial visit.
Yep.
Mazio Bennett was in town. I think Cam Pringle might have dropped by as well. But you had several guys who just took it upon themselves to get to campus and to spend their own time, energy, recruiting these other players to join them. And this is probably, I don't even know if I should say probably, in this class, South Carolina has more guys who have put more time and effort into recruiting other players than any South Carolina class I have ever seen. There's been times when you have 1 or 2 guys from a class who do that, but I've never seen South Carolina have a class with so many guys that are doing that very thing.
And we talked about this yesterday with the guys that were in town for this weekend. You heard a lot of positive things said from several of them about how their visit was. When you think about the guys coming into town for this weekend, what, if anything, does that? What kind of effect does that have on the guys coming in this weekend, having heard from the guys that were just here?
You know, I think the guys pay attention to who is visiting where. I don't know if necessarily it's going to have a huge effect on where these other guys are going to attend. Now, maybe if there's a situation where maybe a player knows another guy really well, there may be a text or a DM sent like, hey, what did you think? What do I need to expect, et cetera, et cetera. I'm looking at it right now. I don't know if there's a guy who is specifically connected to any of these other players, except for maybe Elijah Newby. He's a 3-star linebacker that is coming in. He actually attends the same high school as Dante Reno. Now, Dante obviously transferred high schools this previous offseason, this offseason we're in right now, going into this coming regular season. He transferred high schools. So this is not necessarily a situation where Dante's, been playing ball with him for years and has played on his high school team for years or anything like that. I imagine there's some feedback, but it's not necessarily a huge major thing. For the most part, looking through this group, it's going to be a situation where Carolina will kind of fight their own recruiting battle individually with all these guys. But some highly regarded players, you look at Cam Michael, kid out of Georgia, 4-star cornerback, Gamecocks battling Georgia for him. Nasir Johnson, 4-star defensive lineman out of Dublin, Georgia, has offers from Florida State, Florida, several other schools. Malcolm Ziegler, he is a safety from North Carolina, 4-star guy. South Carolina kind of battling UNC, it feels like there. And so really a nice list of prospects that, again, I think will potentially grow as the week goes on. There's a couple of guys who've been on this list that it appears Carolina will not get into town. Justin Green, I need to take him off the OV list, and Jarvis Boatwright, both those guys committing to other programs here in the last couple of days, with Justin Green committing to Georgia. Jarvis Boatwright, who's a 3-star DB from Florida, committed to Southern Cal. And so I have not directly confirmed that they won't be taking those visits, but you would imagine if they just committed to another school that they will not be taking those trips.
Right. And as you mentioned, most of these guys are with the 2024 class, but we're always keeping our eyes down the road, especially as it pertains to one of the best players in the entire country for the class of 2025. We'll talk about Elijah Griffin on the other side. You're listening to the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs on 107.5 The Game.
My name is Juanita Segura, and I was diagnosed in November of 2014 with non-small cell lung cancer. The first time I heard about biomarker testing was actually my husband. He just started researching about lung cancer.
Then I found out about biomarker testing, and I'm like, why not? Let's try it.
I'm Dr. Jorge Gomez, thoracic medical oncologist at the Mount Sinai Hospital. Comprehensive biomarker testing is looking for either substances in the blood or mutations in some of the genes of the cancer cells that can help us identify special types of lung cancer that can be treated with what we call targeted therapies.
Letting my children know brought all of us a sense of hope. To give them hope that mom is going to be around to see you grow up. And I promised them that.
Ask your doctor about how comprehensive biomarker testing before treatment may help you and your doctor decide on the best treatment for you. Visit noonemiss.org for more.
A public service message from Longevity Foundation.
It's the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour. Presented by Firehouse Subs. Founded by firemen with Chris Clark, Wes Mitchell, and Tyler Head on your home of the Gamecocks. 107.5 The Game.
And welcome back into the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler and Wes along with you for a few more minutes before handing things over to Jay and Terry for the halftime show. Continuing on the topic of recruiting, and as expected, everybody has their eyes on 2025 prospect Elijah Griffin, defensive lineman out of Savannah, Georgia, 6'4", 270, who is a 5-star, recently on campus just a couple of weeks ago. And from recent things that he says, it sounds like South Carolina right there at the top of his list as far as schools he's considering.
Yeah, Gamecock's still very much in this for what is right now the number one player in the country. Now, there are several guys who are going to vie for that spot ultimately, but Elijah is, I believe, the only 5-star plus guy, which means he is a 5-star on all 4 major services, which I think says a lot when there is some consensus about who he is as a player. But yeah, he was recently on campus. That was his first time getting a chance to meet Travian Robertson in person. And we sort of were sitting there kind of waiting to see, kind of wondering what the feedback would be from that. Jimmy Lindsey obviously was very involved, had South Carolina in a good spot before he left. And, Elijah was saying all the right things. He was saying things about South Carolina that he liked other than just Jimmy Lindsey. But you do wonder when that relationship is there, how it's going to affect a prospect's recruitment. In this case, it's still the same thing that it was before, and that's that South Carolina and Georgia are battling it out at the top. And obviously, you look at what Georgia has done on the field, you look at Georgia's done recruiting and in their state. Ultimately, is it going to be tough to pull a guy like this out of Georgia that the national champs won't? Of course, but South Carolina very much in this thing. He has a very open mind. He spoke very, very highly of Travian Robertson, and he actually believes South Carolina is a program that is sort of on the rise. He was impressed with the way they finished last season. He mentioned that, in particular, the way South Carolina beat Tennessee and beat Clemson down the stretch last year. So I think with a lot of these guys, yes, we talk about it all the time. One game doesn't make up a recruit's mind, but when you finish the year by beating a couple of programs who people didn't expect you to, it certainly kind of opens the minds of prospects.
And how much kind of picking up the slack was Robertson having to do once he got here and Lindsey departed for LSU in terms of this specific recruitment? Because, again, Griffin had already established the relationship with Lindsey. Now Robertson comes in and is trying to kind of build that very, very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to downplay the relationship he had with Jimmy Lindsey, because Jimmy Lindsey did a fantastic job of getting Carolina in on him early, getting him on campus early, and really identifying that this was going to be a top national recruit and treating him as so when he was even younger than he is now. I remember Elijah visiting South Carolina's campus this time last year, and there was already talk from people I talked to about, like, hey, this guy might be the top prospect in the country for 2 cycles from now. And so that says a lot that they treated him like that right off the bat. However, as we're seeing, Jimmy Lindsey actually did a good enough job of pointing out the other positives that exist at South Carolina. Jody Wright, who has that area in terms of recruiting territory, he was very involved as well and did a fantastic job with him too. So I think you have some things working in South Carolina's favor. He sort of likes the idea of maybe coming in and helping South Carolina raise the bar a bit as a program. And, I think really it's going to come down to overall, can Travian Robertson continue to build that relationship? I think it was key that Robertson got on the phone with him almost instantly. This was a huge priority to sort of make contact, get this visit set. I think the visit ended up being, I believe that was the 21st, but basically within 24 hours of Travian Robertson being on campus, they were already setting things up to get Elijah Griffin on campus for whenever it worked with Elijah's schedule. So I think that went a long way. I think this recruitment has a long way to go. This is a big-time national offer list, so there are going to be twists and turns, but he is, pretty steadily said South Carolina and Georgia, which, as you know, man, it's kind of more and more rare for prospects to, tell you exactly what they're thinking.
Right.
A lot of them put out these huge, this is my top 10, this is my top 12, this is my top 8.
Right.
Not that other schools aren't still involved, because they are. He is still entertaining other offers. But for him to tell you exactly where his mind is right now is kind of rare, and obviously it's a good situation for South Carolina. If you're a recruitnik and you like watching film, if you like watching highlights, go watch this kid's huddle. He is impressive. No doubt 5-star.
Right, and reading the article on GamecockCentral.com, one thing that sticks out to me about a quote from Griffin is talking about Robertson, and he knows how to get to the NFL and everything that goes into it. And we talk about a guy that is a 5-star. He's thinking, what does 5-star mean? That you're projected to be a number 1 or a first-round draft pick when you get to the NFL. And when he sees a guy like Travian Robertson coming to South Carolina that has been there himself, and yes, his NFL career wasn't, as long as he would have liked it to have been, he still got there, and that's big for a recruit like Griffin to be with a guy like that knows how to get you to where you want to go.
And we've seen Shane Beamer really put I don't know if you say it's the number one priority. It's probably not, but it is a trend now that guys he has hired have either been in the NFL themselves, in the case of Travian, or have coached at some particular level in the NFL. So I think that's something, if you're South Carolina, you keep pushing, and it's something obviously that Elijah has taken notice of. And a lot of times things I see, Tyler, is that whenever recruits say stuff like that, they're kind of parroting what they're being told by the staff. So generally what they're saying is kind of what is likely South Carolina's recruiting pitch for him.
Right. And we'll continue to keep our eye on that recruitment and obviously keep our eye on the guys that are coming into town for their visits this weekend. That'll do it for today's edition of the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs. Halftime show with Jay and Terry coming up next. 107.5 The Game.
Transitioning from being a Marine to a civilian was very hard. I lost my purpose. I lost the drive that I had. That is a very dark and lonely place to be. It took me surrendering to myself to get the help that I needed. At my very first Wounded Warrior Project event, I met Ray Pizarro. He told me, you need to have the courage to forgive yourself for the things you've done in the past. I got it tattooed on my hand. One night, my depression kept telling me, you can end this. And just before I was about to pull the trigger, I looked down at my hand, and that's what saved my life that night. That was the beginning of my incredible journey with the Wounded Warrior Project.
See how we help warriors combat stigma at woundedwarriorproject.org/combat stigma.